Welcome to the Art and Soul Podcast. I'm Alicia, your fellow dreamer and guide on this path of healing. This podcast is our sanctuary, a place where artists, creatives, and sensitive souls like you and me can come to recharge and find inspiration. You'll find tips and tools to help you on your awakening journey. Let's dive deep and discover the magic inside of us. Hello, here we are again for another podcast. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you have not listened yet to the podcast from last week, please do that first. This is part 2 of a 2-part podcast where we are talking about my ego death and my spiritual awakening. I really appreciate all of the messages I've gotten so far about people resonating with and just really hearing my story. And if you are one of those people going through this right now, I am here with you. I am here for you. Please continue to reach out if you need to. I also really appreciate those of you who have listened and reached out who have not gone through something like this, but have been open-minded in listening to it and have been offering such kind words and support. And to me, that is true compassion and empathy to not have experienced something yourself, but to be able to just share love and want to support and help those who are maybe going through something like this currently and presently. I think it's so important too, and just also really cool to have an awareness of this experience, even if it's not something you've experienced yourself or may never experience, but to just know what some people are going through, I think is so important in our world today. So thank you so much for being here. As always, please reach out. Let me know if you have any questions. And this is part 2 of my ego death and spiritual awakening.
We kind of talked about how we would even do this podcast and this interview, and you brought up basically you wanted to go over your ego death and your spiritual awakening. So that implies you had a spiritual awakening. Can we find out where the sort of line or blend was from the ego death into the spiritual awakening, or if there was a sort of transition?
Yeah, so in terms of spiritual awakening, I think, I've been a very spiritual person my entire life since I was very young, and before it was in the context of the Christian church, and that was just the boundary, the box that I had and the reference point that I had for spirituality. And yet at that same time, I talked about this in my first podcast, where I just never fully felt like I quite fit in that Christian box. So I always kind of had that, but it never really bothered me. I always just figured that it was like my coding for greater things and other things, but so having that background and then having the experience of sort of unraveling all of that finally left me room to have a quote-unquote spiritual awakening, which to me was really just asking those questions that I had never even wanted to ask, because I really did feel so connected to that divine source. And when I had to question it and break all of that down, it allowed me to have a different perspective that I don't think I would have been able to have otherwise. So I think my spiritual awakening came along with my rebuilding of myself, because I had been able to tear down that religious box that I had put God in and had put spirituality in for myself. At the same time, simultaneously, people were going through an awakening on earth, like I said, of just the reality behind some of our corrupt systems and government and
even just societal systems, like the
like
the 9 to 5 was so jobs started going more remote. We kept seeing people not wanting to work.
Just these ways that we've always done things. People were like, that is probably not the best way to do that anymore.
Yeah.
Let's move on to something like a little higher vibrational, a little bit better for us as humans. So that was happening too. And so I think that, along with the spiritual aspect, was kind of all wrapped together for me. It also allowed me for the first time to look at some spiritual concepts that before, when I was a big part of Christianity, I was fearful of looking at or was told I shouldn't look into because it was dangerous. Even just concepts like energy healing, for instance, that previously I had been told was dangerous or demonic or all of these things, and I shouldn't even look at it. It allowed me to have the freedom to look at those things after I broke down that barrier. And when I did, I found, oh, this isn't even something, no matter what you believe, this isn't something you should be afraid of. Here's the science behind it.
Yeah.
But I never would have even found some of that had I not been able to break down some of those old belief systems and just structures there.
Yeah. So, was there a point at which you realized you were going through an ego death, or you had gone through an ego death? And then was there a point at which you realized, I'm now going through a spiritual awakening? Or is it really just like you look back on it all and you really didn't know what was going on until like you just were able to piece it together years later?
Well, again, because I didn't know what an ego death was, you know, if I had been listening to a lot of spiritual teachers or like had been in some of the New Age community or anything like that, I would have had some idea of what that was and maybe been looking for it or been able to identify it, but I really had never even heard the term. So for a long time during those however many years that was, I didn't know. I had no idea. I honestly kind of thought I was crazy at first. Yeah, so I don't think I knew very much when it was going on. The first time that I had any indication that this was something other people go through was when we were in Austin.
Mm-hmm. Because we thought we were going to move there.
Because we thought maybe we would move there. And this was in 2021?
Yes, this would have been 2021. This was about a year after
the world shut down. So we were in Austin for a month. And I think that was the first time I had any indication that other people have gone through what I was going through, because I was reading a book called You're Not Dying, You're Just Waking Up. And that book, I think for the first time, showed me that this was a thing. And I honestly don't even remember how much she talks about an ego death or any of that. But I do remember she talked a good bit about just spiritual awakening in general. And I think sometimes, like I said, an ego death goes hand in hand with spiritual awakening. So I think she probably did mention that at some point in the book. I can't even remember. Great book.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know if this is too off topic, but like even the idea of a spiritual awakening in your situation, it breaks down the fundamentalist Christian view, because the idea is like we're told, Jesus says you have to be born again.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would argue this was being born again.
Right.
But I think to Christians, being born again means you confess your sins, you ask Jesus to take your life, and you accept him as your savior.
And then you're kind of done.
And you're done.
Yeah.
That's really kind of the narrative, is then you're done, and then you spend the rest of your life trying to get other people to do the same thing so that you can save them from going to hell. That's that's what was ingrained in me, and I think you, and we had done the quote-unquote born-again experience, because I prayed a prayer that I didn't know what it meant when I was 6. And so I apparently had done it.
Right, yeah.
And so to go through something like this, with our religious background, we had no one really to kind of give you the insight and guidance of what was truly going on within your heart.
Right. Well, and because, like I've mentioned probably 1,000 times at this point, I really was connected to God.
Yeah.
Like I was, truly. And like I've said many times, my only goal through my whole life was just, I want to know more of God. And I liked that connection. Always. I liked that connection. So I wanted more of it. And so the idea of a spiritual awakening is funny to a person like that, because it's like, well, you already have that.
What do you mean?
You're already awake. You're already awakened
already accepted
Yeah, you're
Christ.
already awakened to God and who he is in his fullness. What more could you need?
Yeah, exactly. After that, there's considered not really anything until you get to heaven, or like we said, the journey of just trying to
save other people.
Save others.
Yeah. But the ego death going hand in hand with that experience was incredible to allow me to finally question and look at that and look at what I believed about that. And did I really know God? And who is God really? And how does God relate to these new things I'm learning about energy and like the scientific principles behind all of us being energy and energy healing and all of that stuff that kind of started to come in my rebirth phase. I started to kind of be interested and gain some of these skills in energy work, and that started to inform a lot of my belief system as well, my new belief system.
Yeah, and so, like, you say your belief system, that to me is interesting because, like, what is it now? You know, like, it's forever changed, I'm assuming.
Yeah, well, and the cool thing about it is forever changing. I think it could be looked at as very silly to know that you believe something wholeheartedly that in 10 years you might decide is wrong. But from my perspective, I actually think it's one of the wisest things you can do because you're allowing room for growth and for change in your own life, and you're allowing space in your mind for expansion and for expansion on what you already know and growth on what you already know. And I think so many people are either afraid of that, afraid of learning something that they don't know how to unpack or don't want to hear or can't go back from, or they're just not interested in it. And that's totally fine too. I mean, there are many people who are just not curious like I am, but I am such a philosopher at heart and so curious about all different aspects of why we're here, what we're doing, and how we connect to each other and to that divine source energy. I'm so interested in that. And so to me, I am so open to that continually growing and changing and becoming something that I didn't realize it could be. Because to me, that is God exceeding our expectations. Right now, so many people are living with God in a box that is this expectation box. Like, this is what he's able to do. This is what we're able to do as people. These are all the things we shouldn't do. And there are definitely things that I feel in my spirit, in my body, are wrong and are not okay. Some of those are just moral things, but then some of those are just, for me personally, my discernment says that that's not safe or that's not appropriate for me personally. And that's my own belief about some very small, specific things. But overall, I just kind of feel like how beautiful and incredible that God could keep surprising us with more and more of this life experience and like what it means to be human and what it means to be a spirit being living in a body.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, I wouldn't say that I have a belief system per se, except that I am always willing to challenge the norm, and I am just continuing to follow that North Star, which to me is that God energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and people have always said that you have a very pure heart, and that you're a very pure person, you're a pure at heart person. And so I think you've known that yourself and trust that yourself, that your own intuition is pure, and you can almost kind of like use that as sort of a guide as well.
Yeah.
Let's go back to your experience with your spiritual awakening. Can we have you describe what were some of the things that sparked it along the way? Tangible things that we can like picture in this story of yours. If we're watching the movie of Alicia, I know you talked about that book. Were there other books? Were there moments of just events that also helped you, that also were an integral part of this process? Was there...
I think this is a difficult question, mainly because to me, it always felt like coming home to the truth. So there was never a moment really where I looked at something and I was like, oh my goodness, it's that instead of that. that's crazy. It was more like, oh, yes, that's right. And I just knew it deep in my bones. So yeah, sometimes it was I read a ton during that time. I mean, I was reading about energy work. I mean, reading Eileen McCusick's book, Electric Health, Electric Body, was huge for me because it talked about the scientific aspect of energy. And to me, that's so related to spirituality and to this whole experience we're going through. And so that was a really prominent marker for me.
So it's not like you really went down some road where you're like, I am not like I used to be. I'm gonna do a bunch of drugs. I'm gonna go to these parties, meet new people. Like, you didn't do this type of thing. You didn't. It's almost like you didn't even sort of have like a rebellious phase in all of this either.
No,
which again, I think speaks to what you're such a pure-hearted person.
No, it just kind of clicked in. It just felt like it clicked in with just different things. Like I said, the books. I mean, I did, of course, follow some people on social media and YouTube that I just heard things in a different way than I had heard them before. And that definitely helped. Especially what helped was feeling like I wasn't alone in that sort of part too. Like just understanding the Bible in a different way, understanding who Jesus was in a different way than I had ever heard, and God. And
see, and I think it's interesting with your background, growing up a very Bible-centered style Christian, and then leading into whatever this sort of is that you want to define, this sort of spiritual journey. And I think a lot of people describe going through something like this, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, it feels like some people even pull some sort of 180, like maybe they they start like blasting Christianity, or God, maybe they become atheists even, or like God isn't even real, or maybe they switch a religion, or maybe they become so more jaded of the older version of themselves. And through just observation and me getting front row seats to just your life as well, it doesn't feel like you've had that type of spiritual awakening or complete left turn or whatever. It feels like, in a way, like you could almost describe it as a spiritual expansion.
Yeah.
Like you even said, like you look at a Bible in a different way. Like a lot of people in your situation, I feel like might be like, I don't even consider the Bible anymore to be something important in my life. Where now you're like, I get it in a different way, and in a more entirely expansive way, in a less inhibited way.
Yeah, because I think you're talking a lot about like deconditioning and destructuring, and for a lot of people that means leaving and running away and running to something else to fill that void. And for me, I was okay with the void, and so it didn't scare me to not run to something else and to just allow things to naturally fall away that didn't align any longer with who I was becoming. And also, I think that for some people in a spiritual awakening, like spirituality is just new for them. So they're going to cling on to some form of spirituality, and typically that's a religion of some sorts. It's New Age, it's Buddhism, it's Christianity, whatever it is, you know? And I recognize that that's part of a spiritual awakening for some people, but I had already been there.
Yeah.
So it was like it's like the next level. It's not that it's in levels, but like it's the next place to go after that.
Yeah. I see what you're saying.
And when people leave religions like Christianity, because that's the one I know, but when people leave that, a lot of times they leave it, and like you said, when they go to like Buddhism or atheism or something, it's because they're still looking for those answers or looking for that connection in some way
outside of themselves,
and they aren't in a place yet where they're capable of cultivating that, and that's totally fine. Like, that's okay. They can totally shift and do that, and I still think that people have the ability to continue asking questions and going through the mud of it in those spaces, and that's perfect. But that just, you know, like I said, I kind of already did that. I did a lot of that in my youth, and who knows, maybe before this lifetime or something like that. But yeah, so I think that's why. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of saying, yeah, I believe in God, but it's not the God you all believe in, you know, or it looks a lot different than what it
Yeah.
used to look like. I'm not afraid of that. And I don't feel like I need to label it. I don't feel like I need it to be a specific doctrine or religion or anything like that.
Which in a way feels like it does make it a little bit more difficult for you to explain it.
Yeah, people don't get it.
Right?
It's very
like,
confusing.
Yeah,
to
you don't have
terminology,
writings or whatever now that you can be like, well, now it's this.
Mm-hmm. Well, and like you were just saying, people are afraid to listen to themselves, like to listen internally. They want to be told the truth. They want to be told the answers. So often, no matter where you are, like what religion or whatever. I remember having a conversation with a friend back when I would have considered myself a Christian, and we were talking about hearing from God and what it feels like to hear from God and basically following your intuition and following God's leading. And she said something to me like, well, that doesn't line up with what the Bible says, like whatever I was talking about doing. And I said, well, the Bible really doesn't say anything about it. It doesn't say not to do it or whatever. It just doesn't say anything about it. She's like, yeah. And I was like, and also the Bible was written by people. They were inspired. This is the Christian, version. They were inspired by the Holy Spirit, by God, to write these words down. Why was that person any more important? Why was their connection any better than my connection and my Spirit of God inside of me? What's the difference? Why couldn't I have written those same words? And that's kind of still how I feel. I mean, it's like all of the text that we have is really great and can be really helpful to a lot of people, but also God is in us. We have the Spirit of God in us, and it speaks. And that's what we can listen to. And this could be a really long tangent that I won't get into, but I think that's what Jesus was really teaching.
Do you think part of your spiritual awakening was recognizing that God is within you and not outside of you? Or do you think you already knew that? Or was it more an expanded version of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I always believed that. Like I said, I mean, I was in the middle of Christianity having that conversation with someone. So I think I always believed that. And it was just when I was in that deepest, darkest place and I was looking outside of myself and nothing was answering me.
Yeah.
And no one was telling me how to get out of it or what the answer was or answering any of my questions. Then there was no other place to turn, right? The options are death or find life inside of you. Those are the options.
Now I can already hear that one person. I always in my head have that one person who looks at it, maybe you describe it as looking at it glass half empty, that more negative person. I mean, let's be honest, maybe that person who's just like really doesn't even believe in spirituality or doesn't even really understand spirituality. They just see the world the way it is. That's it. I already hear the person going, so you got really sad because things weren't working out, and then you started to feel better by accepting your situation. What could you say to that person right now who would have that type of view of your interpretation of your spiritual awakening and ego death?
Well, that's their perspective. I mean, There is nothing to say to that person that this is my story and my experience, and that's my experience, I mean, there's nothing to say. I'm not trying to prove anything to anybody about what an ego death is or that they should go through it. That person probably should not go through it. Like, that person should probably not question things because it's going to be a really rude awakening.
It's going to be a rough one on them.
It is. And you go through these things when you're ready for them with anything, healing, spiritual awakening, any kind of expansion. You go through that when you're ready for it and when you say, okay, whether that's known to you or not, whether that's an internal okay or not, is a different question. But
would you say it's for everybody?
Not everybody is ready to do that. And that's not everyone's purpose in this life. I don't think. I think people have a lot of different reasons for being here. And I think people have the ability to grow and heal and expand as much as they desire to. And some people just don't even have that desire. And there's nothing wrong with that. There really is nothing wrong. It's just not for everyone in that sense. I think everyone has the opportunity in their lifetime to grow and to do things differently. I think they're given situations, and I think they're given people like me who challenge their beliefs or challenge their perspective, and I think it is free will that allows them to say, nope, I'm shutting that down. I don't want any part of that. I'm going to do things the way I've always done them, and I'm going to believe things the way I've always believed them, and I feel safe in that, and I feel secure in that. And there is nothing wrong with that, and there is no reason why that person is any worse than me or I'm any better than that person.
Yeah.
There is not a competition there in that sense.
Okay. Now, let me flip that, and let's say there's the person hearing your story and going, wow, I think I need to go through something like this, or I'd like to. But I don't really know how. What if there's that person who has that desire? Like, we see those people that are always, maybe it's the person that kind of like seeks the spiritual high, or maybe it's the person who's just really trying to, like, they're always searching. They're always looking for something.
Yeah.
And they're like, I need this experience so bad. I can feel it. I've wanted it, but I just can't figure out how I could make it happen if they wanted to.
Well, the first thing is, most likely you're not going to make ego death happen. It's going to happen. And so you can't really live your life in the expectation that you're waiting for this thing to happen. All you can do is grow your knowledge, get to know yourself on a deeper level, and
ride the wave, baby.
and be part of communities of people that are doing the same. Yeah. And you will grow if you're around people that are growing too. And everybody's growth looks different. And trust me, you don't want to go through an ego death if you don't have to. No, I mean, I understand the want to do things a different way and to be a different person than you are and to change. And to me, if you keep following that leading and just try to enjoy your life along the way, it will happen for you if that is what you desire.
Follow-up question. How about the person who resonates with what you're saying and is thinking, wow, this is really something I'm going through right now. I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. I feel like I've been going through this ego death, but maybe they're not out on the other side yet. Is there something you can say for that person going through it right now? Is there something you can say to help them on their journey?
There are a few things. One is that you have to go through it. You have to go all the way through it. It's the only way out. And so don't stop. Just keep going, even if you have to go slow, even if you have to go at the speed of a snail, just keep going. And the other is that I would want you to know that it's not forever. You really will come out on the other side, even though it doesn't feel like it right now. And even though it feels so distressing and so dark at times, you will come out on the other side of it. It's temporary. And you're going to come out so much stronger and so much more glorious than you could have ever imagined. And then the last thing I'll say is that sometimes we take healing and awakening and all this stuff like so seriously. But it doesn't have to be that serious. And I know it feels really deep and dark sometimes when you're going through it, but allow yourself to come outside of yourself as much as you can and witness your process while recognizing that it's just a process you have to go through, and you can kind of find joy and laughter and humor in it as much as possible. I mean, that's really going to help through the process as much as you can. And that's why sometimes it is better to at least have a friend who you can explain, this is what I'm going through, even if they haven't been through it. This is what I'm going through. If I'm saying these things, like, just remind me that that's not me. I got to get some of this stuff out and work through it, and just remind me that I won't be in this forever.
So as I have continually done to probably ask you questions out of order, that's just my brain for you. Can we go back just a little bit and kind of cover a little bit more of your awakening process and then into kind of where you're at now? So, like, for instance, I'm understanding, and our listeners right now would probably be understanding, there was a moment where you felt like you came out of your ego death hole
Mm-hmm.
You're feeling much more accepting. You're grateful for your, everything you've got, everything around you, like a different person. You're like the butterfly you comes out, right?
Mm-hmm.
What does this butterfly version of you look like then compared to the old you?
Well, first, I want to clarify that as you're coming out of it, sometimes you feel like you're coming out of it and then you kind of go back a little bit. And you feel like you're coming out of it and then you go back a little bit. And I think that's just an important clarification because...
Yeah. And that was a big part of your process, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because you start to embody these new parts of yourself, but then you're still reprogramming your subconscious in a lot of ways. And so you're having to deal with that part of yourself and your old kind of personality and also the old perception of you from other people. So if you're emerging from the cocoon and you're like emerging back into the world, back into your life, people are, for the most part, expecting you to be the same way you were, whatever it was, 10 months ago, 10 years ago, however long it took you. So there is a bit of a back and forth at first until you get used to your new body and your new self. Like, I remember being in a place where I was kind of stepping into my own voice and my authentic voice and my own truth. And I was getting in these like arguments with my boss at work, which I never would have done before. And I remember coming home and thinking like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I said that to him.
Yeah, because you're generally for someone who doesn't know, you're a very sweet person. So I remember there were moments you snapped at him and then you told me about it and I was like, yeesh.
Yeah, and it was like it was like I was integrating the new system. Like I had updated the system, but it was still working out all the bugs. And so I was just doing things that I wasn't used to doing. And then it would like emotionally affect me because I wasn't so used to hiding or not speaking my truth or whatever. And it was just really jarring at first. So there was like a lot of back and forth, both in my heart and in my mind at that time. And then eventually everything just sort of clicked in at one time. And it finally felt like I was able to be the person I knew that I was deep down after all this time. And the funny thing is that person reminds me of myself as a child at a very young age. It's like this deep part of me at my core that I'm finally able to express to the world. But then there's the maturity and the wisdom of my 33-year-old self added on top of that. So it's kind of a fun rebirth of my child self in a way too. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to say was that a big part, and this is also helpful for people who are kind of in that reintegration period, but a big part of that for me was doing energy work on myself. I don't think everyone is an energy healer, and I don't think everyone needs to, learn how to do that, but definitely getting that kind of help during that reintegration process, or any part of the process, honestly, is so, so helpful. And I think it's a big reason why I am the person that I am today. I think I was able to release a lot of that junk that was coming up in the ego death that I didn't know what to do with.
Yeah. And
it was just a really streamlined process for me of releasing it and then integrating all of the newness.
Yeah. I mean, and it's funny we haven't even mentioned this yet. You said when you yelled at your boss, it was sort of like a moment of a newer, authentic version of you kind of coming out. And it hit me just now. I can't even believe we've barely even talked about authenticity in this whole spiritual awakening process, because I've heard many people say oftentimes that authenticity really is just that higher vibrational version of ourselves that we can truly be. Can you explain how you might have your authenticity might have been affected as well in the process of like becoming a new person?
Well, in the beginning, it was extremely frustrating because, as you've mentioned, I've always been a person who values authenticity and truth. And so I had always wanted to be the most authentic version of myself. And when I first was going through kind of even like the steps right before the actual moment of the ego death, I was frustrated with myself because I had become a person that wasn't as vulnerable as I used to be, that wasn't as authentic as I used to be, or as open as I used to be. And so it was like a bit of frustration in my own life that I felt scared or trapped or unable to be the fullest version of myself. And I think that was even part of the catalyst to the unraveling too. And then in the middle of it, it was really frustrating because I didn't know who I was anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't be authentic to yourself if you don't know what that is.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, is that where you're going right now?
I've also just been going through moments of like, I don't honestly know who I am.
Yeah.
I don't know who I am outside of all the things that define me in this world of who I am.
Right. Yeah.
And I've also often been being like, I'm not sure I even remember who I was as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and for some people, who they were as a kid was altered a lot too.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's true for a lot of people. Yeah, so I felt, I mean, that was kind of part of what I was talking about with the void too, where I didn't want to be around people because I just didn't want to be an inauthentic version of myself, but I didn't know what my authentic self was, so it was just easier to just not be at all.
Yeah.
You know? And then as I started to reemerge and, like I said, my authenticity just started like bursting out of me at different points, it was almost kind of frightening, but I was like, oh, there you are. Thank goodness. Now let's just get you to like a, social acceptance level, and then we're good to go, And so, yeah, I feel now that my authenticity does shine through most times. And when it doesn't, I feel that I can recognize that, and I know how to adapt now to the point where I can recognize that I'm not being truthful or I'm not being authentic in a way that I want to be, and then just change. It's just a simple switch at this point, I feel like.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's taken a long time to get here.
Now, and I can assume people would be curious, that older version of you that was clinging on to, say your acting career, what your dream was,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe other things that you also kind of dropped or changed as a person. Will those things come back, and will they come back in a different way? Are you acting? Do you plan to act again? That was so definitive of who you were for so long.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like now with this newer version of you?
Yeah, I'm not totally sure, to be authentic. And the truest part of me is okay with that. The deepest part of me is okay with that now. And I think that is the difference. Is before I was so afraid of losing this part of myself because it was my identity. And now I know I'm an actor no matter what. I mean, that's just part of who I am. It's part of my skill set, and it's something that I enjoy. And I know that I'm an artistic person and a creative person, and I know that I'm a sensitive person, and I know that those things will always come into play with whatever I'm doing. So with my business now and everything I'm doing now, I find that I'm utilizing a lot of those skills in what I'm doing. And I do have dreams to make things again, to make a TV show and some other things, but it's not necessarily holding the weight of purpose the way that it used to. And in a way, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Because now it can be whatever it's meant to be, and that is real creativity. That is exactly what it should be. So I feel confident in just letting it roll, just riding the wave. I also want to say that realizing that I'm meant to help people heal has been a big part of that ability to easily let this go, because I think for a lot of people, if they're letting something old go, they're looking for something to replace that. And I never really had to look for that. I never had to find an alternative, because it was just the more that I went into myself and understood who I really am and why I'm on earth, the more I just clearly knew that I'm meant to heal and I'm meant to help people. And I recognized that even in acting, I always really cared about the people that I was working with on the projects I was working on. And that was a big drive for me, was those relationships with those people. And so in a way, it's still the same thing. I'm still looking to have beautiful relationships with people and to help them live as the freest and truest version of themselves. now and then. So in that way, I just feel satisfied, I think, in my own journey and my own purpose. And I feel that I can fulfill that no matter what I'm doing.
Can you share some steps or decisions you might have made in your life that happened maybe because of your spiritual awakening? Like things that you might have been like, oh, I wouldn't have done that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, but because of who I am now, I'm doing this.
Yeah, well, it definitely made it easier for me to leave LA.
Mm-hmm.
I never wanted to leave LA because I committed to that city as well as acting in general. So I finally felt myself being able to leave LA when everything about me changed. It just felt like I no longer needed to be there. And part of that is cool because I do believe that where the industry is going, the entertainment industry is going, and just all the things that I could potentially be involved in the future in some way, where those things are going, I don't think are going to be solely in LA like they used to be anymore anyway. It's already going in a different direction. But yeah, so that was one thing that I feel like was an easy decision after this. And then the other thing I think would be like fully embracing myself as an energy healer. I think I mean, even for many years when I was acting, I was a massage therapist, I was a personal trainer, like all these other things, but I never fully embraced them or was able to dive deeply into what it was like to run my own massage business or anything like that because I was so concerned on this other identity and it being only that. And so I think now being a business owner and an energy healer, I feel like I could kind of do anything I want, and that's kind of fun. I feel like I'm open to the direction that life takes me and so much more free and open in a way that I wasn't before. What?
You're cute.
And yeah, I feel also like, you know, maybe we'll have some kids or something. Who knows?
Oh, okay. Gotta go. Cool. I mean, honestly, I feel like we've covered a really great, amount here for people to listen to and digest. And I'm sure there's much more to be talked about. I'm sure there's more details to go over that you might be able to share later or later in other episodes. But unless you feel like there's anything else you'd want the listener to know, any sort of last things about what your journey's been on this ego death and then spiritual awakening?
Yeah, I think we've covered it. I think that's everything that I would hope for someone to know about the experience. And thank you so much for listening. And I hope that if you're going through this, that you have some friends and family that you can share this with and share with them that this is what's happening to you. And I hope that you feel inspired in the knowledge that you're not alone in this. And a lot of us go through this and that it's not forever. So thanks. Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to my story. And
thanks for bearing with me as the interviewer. This is, I can definitely say, my first interview.
Yeah, we just thought it would be, really fun to do this together. And like I said, there were kind of like big gaps in my memory. So I wanted to make sure that we were covering all the aspects of the whole experience and journey and that it was fulfilling that. So
thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks
as a guest interviewer.
Thanks for being my first guest on my podcast.
Hey, anytime. I love you.
I love you. So if you are listening to this and you are on your own healing journey, please make sure to check out my website or my Substack membership. There are so many goodies and resources on there for you, whether you want to do one-on-one sessions with me or if you'd rather be in the community of people healing together. Either option is great and both will help facilitate your healing in a really special way. So just keep going, keep following your heart, keep listening, and I promise you'll come out on the other side. Talk to you soon.